Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Good morning, and welcome to Government Contracting Weekly. I'm Jim McCarthy, the owner of Key Solutions and the host of this show. I know you're going to find today's program to be really interesting, and I suspect eye-opening, as we probe the complicated subject of ethical issues and compliance risks in government contracting. Helping me with this daunting task are three outstanding leaders who bring not only years of experience, but also each guest comes with their own unique perspective. First, I'd like to welcome back to Government Contracting Weekly Dr. Nick Nayak, the Chief Procurement Officer for the Department of Homeland Security and a member of the NCMA Board of Advisors. Good morning, Nick. Welcome back.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Glad to have you here. Next, I'd like to welcome Kimberly Rupert, the Senior Vice President of Contracts and Pricing for SAIC and a member of the NCMA Board of Directors. Good morning, Kim.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. And finally, Stuart Hazlett, the Director of Contracting for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and also a member of the NCMA Board of Advisors. Good morning, Stuart.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, panel, we've got a lot to cover, so let's begin to explore the relationship between government and industry. The first question is for you, Stuart. Let's talk about the nature of the relationship between government and industry. How should it work? Is it sort of like arm's length? Is it sort of like partner? Is it master-servant? What is the ideal relationship that's supposed to exist between government and contractors ethically?
I like to think of it, Jim, as a continuum, and that we go into different phases of our acquisition or our project with different relationships in that professional business relationship, such as when we're writing a requirement, we are very much embedded together. We are working together and understanding what is it that we want to acquire. And then as we move in through the acquisition, though, we may move into that phase where we have to have more of a distance for protecting the proprietary rights of proposals coming in and so forth, and make sure our evaluations are equitable and fair. And then we'll move into, once we're awarded, then we become partners because we're going to build a project together.
Okay. Okay, Kim, what is the one thing that it shouldn't be between government and industry?
Well, it certainly shouldn't be ever inappropriate discussions or trying to adjust the competition. It should always be above board, ethical, transparent.
And no personal services in terms of that?
Absolutely not.
And of course there's a tendency, at least from the contractor side, once in a while to think that it's sort of morphing into personal services because they're trying to, try to serve their clients so well that often it bleeds into that. At least that's the fear.
I think we certainly passionately care about the customer's mission, the government's mission, but I think everyone who really works in this environment knows that personal services distance and really respects that space to make sure that issues don't arise as a result of that.
Nick, but from your perspective at DHS, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is you mentioned master servant. That I absolutely hate that phrase. I don't even know where that came into the discussion. I would agree with everything that Stuart and Kim said, and just sort of add this, and that is that throughout the process and the phases of the process, you at a minimum have to listen to what industry is saying. You have to hear it, and then how you communicate in those various phases differs, as Stuart actually
So let's
explained.
talk about, we'll stay with you, Nick. Let's talk about this relationship a little bit further and get down to the actual details. What are the rules of engagement between government and industry on things like going to lunch or attending a conference or traveling together or heading to conferences or getting a cup of coffee? For God's sake, some people think that it's gone too far. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to hear these guys' take on this, but mine is kind of, there's, first of all, you should take your training, your ethics training, and understand the rules, all of the scenarios that you just outlined are explained in training. But I think the rule of thumb is use your gut. On my side, as a public servant, you kind of have to think, what is the appearance to the American taxpayer with whatever it is that you're doing? And if you use your gut instinct, it usually, and you listen to it, it's usually going to lead you in the right direction. But I'd be interested in what Stuart or Kim has to say.
Can you attend a party with your contractor, so to speak?
Well, certainly. I think that that prudent business behavior, because we have to maintain the public trust. And we always have to remember that a contractor is not a government employee. So there are a higher standard that you may have to have in place when you are involved in maybe any kind of party or so forth like that. But I think that you should be able to, keep the professional friendships, and those relationships are very important, but we should never go overboard to say we cannot engage together, because we can go to lunch together. I may buy my own lunch, but that doesn't mean we can't have lunch together unless you are involved in an actual source selection.
And you happen to be a procurement official?
Have to change. Yes, sir.
In particular. And that sort of takes us to the third question, Kim, which is, let's say you're in a very proper location, you followed all the rules correctly, you've followed your gut, and you, at what point does the exchange of information become improper? Is there a line where all of a sudden it hits?
Well, certainly when you're talking about being right in the thick of a solicitation, there are absolutely rules that you must follow. I think from a government perspective, it's in their interest to make sure that all bidders have the same level of information. And so any contractor who has additional information that is non-public or not available to other bidders really needs to recuse themselves from bidding. It's really an above-board process, and you have to respect that.
Here's the question. A government official, we're at lunch, and I say to you, any idea when that RFP is coming out? Can you answer that question? Is that proper, Nick? Is that?
It depends on where you're at in the process. And the thing I always say is, let's not act like scaredy cats, but at the same time, let's be prudent in what we're saying. So again, and by the way, listening. So you can go to any form you want. You can listen to everything. But as a public official, and I think a taxpayer would really care about this, you have to be very careful with what you say. So you're not creating any unfairness in the system.
Right. And if you come to my office, do I have to charge you 50 cents if I give you a cup of coffee? What do you think?
No, there are certain, even in the Code of Ethics, that I think it's called the donut and coffee rule.
That's okay.
We don't have to worry about that. But there is those standards of the $20 on the gifts or the $50 from any one source. But I always hate to be cliche, but it depends. And when you were describing, Nick was describing that relationship as into what phase we are in, it depends. If you are that procurement contracting officer and you're in that and you're having a discussion there, you never want to jeopardize the integrity of the procurement.
Keep it simple, get your own cup of coffee.
Get it,
Enjoy the discussion.
By the way, all this talk of donuts and coffee, maybe we should serve them here next time. We're going to step away for a commercial right now, and when we come back, we're going to continue some discussion on ethics.
So, did we win that government contract?
We did.
And?
And now we've got to deal with the regulatory hurdles.
Well, good luck with that.
When the government's your client, you need to play by their rules.
Ah, and the rules change more than you think.
Exactly. We need someone who's done this before. Plus, it's complicated, so we're going with BDO.
BDO?
People who know government contracting know BDO.
Welcome back. We're on the key subject of ethics in government contracting. And Kimberly, a question for you. Let's postulate that two contractors are working side by side on the same project. What can we do to make sure that they stay within their statement of work and their contract and there's no transfusion and so on?
Well, from a contractor perspective, every employee is going to know their scope of work. They have work packages that are passed down from their program manager in their company. And so when they're working side by side, they might know what's happening on the program overall, but they're really going to stay in the scope of their work package. And then the government is going to oversee the whole thing. They're the ones who have written these statements of work, and they're going to make sure that things stay in their lanes.
So they stay in the right swim lane. Yeah. A question, Nick, that I've always wanted to ask a government official, and I think it's a very interesting question, and that is, do government officials tend to, over time, eventually think of their contractors almost as colleagues, as government employees as well, or is there always a sort of a separation that takes place between them?
Well, really, there should be a separation that takes place between the two. I agree with what Kim said. You know, by the way, from the contractor perspective, who's going to want to do more work outside of what they're being told to do? So that'd be kind of the first thing. The second thing, Kim mentioned it very well, and that is, it is the government's responsibility to hover over what's going on when there are multiple contractors working side by side. So, you know, we take it very seriously, and again, I don't see it being that big of an issue. It usually kind of works itself out.
Right. Well, Stu, have there been cases where contractors are asked to essentially compete with each other after the award? In other words, for more scope or more prominence or more money or more dollars or more hours or more people?
Well, it does become a challenge, as Kim was stating, that the delineation between government and contractors, that oftentimes if we're not marked or we don't remind ourselves that they're contractors, we start thinking them as fellow government employees, and we may start asking them to do certain work, which we never want to cross the line with personal services. And with that then comes with great employees from different companies. You may have a hot shot from one company that wants to take on more work. We have to go back and remind ourselves, what is the contract taskings that came with that particular company?
Right. Okay, a question for any of you actually. Something that also is on the minds of contractors often. Is it proper for a incumbent contractor to essentially draft the scope of work for the follow-on contract and say to the government, here's what you need? How does government react to that? Nick?
First of all, you can look at anything that's given to you, okay, but you're clearly not going to take a statement of work from any contractor and you know, use it in some subsequent recompete. Lots of things go on, and you know, kind of back to that the first question that you asked. It's human nature for people to be in one environment, one building, and talk to each other, get along over time if they've been together for a long time. But it is important that our system works. I think Stuart laid it out pretty well. That you know, you've got the separation, you have the government hovering over everything. And again, back to this question about looking at a statement of work for subsequent work. You can look at it, you can, you know, in fact, you can go out and ask everybody for their ideas. We do it all the time with RFIs, and even when we issue draft RFPs and when we have other communications before we issue RFPs. So you don't want to be scared of this stuff, but you want to be mindful of the rules, and you don't want to cross any lines. So you want to be very deliberate.
Deliberate. Okay.
And a contractor, I think, is going to be very careful about not crossing the line into an organizational conflict of interest. They have incumbency, they have deep knowledge of the subject, and they certainly don't want to have to recuse themselves on the follow-on for that competition. So there are some pretty strict rules, and they're going to be mindful. And
I know SAIC is involved in many contracts and many different agencies. I understand that, and there's also you're involved in this sort of a gradual shift to more and more fixed price contracting. So it seems to me there's a dilemma here. Let's say for 20 years the contract was a cost type contract, cost reimbursable, and all of a sudden it comes out under LPTA, and the contractor is used to working cost plus, and now it's a fixed price contract. Right. How does that work? How's that tension? How do you handle it?
That's a very good point, Jim, because in project management, after it's awarded, if it's a fixed price, all the risk is on the contractor, and then of course we want to have a little bit more hands-off from the government. But if it's a cost reimbursement environment, we're going to have more hands-on and interaction with it. So when that transition happens and it goes to a fixed price, it is from the project manager helping everyone understand where are those boundaries of the contract tasking, so that we know we've got to allow the contractors, not tell them how to do it, but let them bring us a deliverable.
The only thing I would add to that is if after 20 years of cost plus on whatever it is you're buying, you haven't learned something about it, that some portion of that can't be fixed price, that would be interesting. I'm not saying that it absolutely has to move to fixed price, but it's interesting.
Have you ever had to tell the government, I'm sorry, I can't do that. That is not in the terms of our scope?
Oh, in a fixed price contract, I think you really have to do that to be sure there's not scope creep and overruns that are going to really hurt the contractor and upset the government. They don't want that
So
either.
you're mindful of that. Now, how does the government take it? Do they say, oh, this all of a sudden, this contractor's uncooperative, they won't do it? They keep throwing the contract up at me. How does that, how do
No,
you
I think this is normal business. This stuff
Yes.
happens all the time.
And I remind people, I mean, it's a business professional relationship that we have to maintain here.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to step away again, and we have a couple other questions that I think are key to the whole issue of ethics. So we'll be right back after this commercial.
AOC Key Solutions and the Government Technology and Services Coalition are pleased to announce that General Dynamics Information Technology, a top-tier integrator of mission-critical IT systems, is a 2014 Mentor of the Year award winner. Nominated by CTI, General Dynamics Information Technology increased CTI's teaming opportunities, helped CTI advance its customer relationships, and improve the company's proposal and operational processes, as well as CTI's business development and marketing. General Dynamics IT also helped CTI introduce their capabilities to new customers with similar requirements. On behalf of the Government Technology and Services Coalition and AOC Key Solutions, congratulations to General Dynamics IT.
As you've seen from watching our show, we've begun to produce and air commercials. For advertisers, this is smart for a couple of reasons. First, there's no waste. Our audience is almost entirely contracting executives and procurement officers. Second, we include commercial production, and with KSI's $130 billion in wins, we know how to create the most impactful message. To learn more, contact us at governmentcontractingweekly.com and click on Advertise.
Welcome back. We're glad to have you all here today. Subject is ethics, and I don't think we can have a discussion of ethics without talking about the proverbial revolving door. Stu, can you tell us a little bit about what the revolving door is about, what the rules are, how that works?
Well, Jim, it's a government official that decides to transition into private service, into a company. And one of the first things we haven't talked about here is the importance of the ethics counselor. And that when a government official decides to go into the private industry, he's going to receive an ethics debriefing. And that ethics debriefing then will allow to set the parameters. Are you going to have 1 year no contact? May you be 2 years banned from doing in that particular business line? So that's very important to happen at the transition and make that aware to your new employer.
Okay.
And sometimes there's lifetime bans as well.
Sometimes it's lifetime. And what is that, a function of how far up the organization chart somebody is? Or?
Not really.
No?
It's a function of what you were working on and what you will be doing when you leave government.
At SAIC, we're really going to care about those restrictions. We're going to want to see them in writing when we hire someone. And
just as
you
a
say,
safeguard. Yep.
Absolutely. You want to be above board and ethical in all instances and abide by those rules.
Which is one thing that should make people feel very comfortable about the system, that both sides care about ethics.
Right. Because any breach of ethics, not only is it unethical and could get everybody in trouble, but it's bound to result in a protest of some sort, right?
And
very
Somebody
negative
hears about that?
consequences.
Yeah.
And
Not good.
absolutely, I mean, we're all about the common purpose of supporting the mission.
Right.
And so anything that diverts from that mission then is joint
And up to and including criminal
up to and
issues.
including criminal, yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, Kim, you know, Stuart mentioned about the ethics counselor at the very end. What does SAIC do? What does industry do in general to keep the focus, the spotlight right on ethics to make sure it's always forefront in people's minds?
Well, a couple of years ago in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, they made a rule that says all companies have to have an ethics program. At SAIC, and I'm sure other industry members, we have a very strong program that sets forth all the values of the company. You train it. Every individual certifies annually that they're going to follow it. It's really developed at every level and monitored at every level, supervisors, managers, all the way up to the CEO. It's a way to do business. It's not just rules.
And then it's often refreshed, what, annually or something? Is that?
Constantly, actually.
How about in DHS?
Same. It's annual. It's very rigorous. People like taking it because they like to know the boundaries. Very similar to the private sector. I had heard, so for instance, often it's delivered online. Often it's 100 or more ethics scenarios and questions, and you cannot pass it unless you get everything correct, 100% on the testing of it.
Okay, well, Stuart, let me ask you this question. Let's assume that the ethics counseling is in place, there's an ethics program, and everybody's compliant. Can a senior official of government, say, depart government one day and show up in the boardroom or the war room of a contractor the next day and provide information and insight to the proposal team? Is that proper?
If they were involved in the creation of the requirement on the side of the government, no. I mean, in that advisory role, and there again, it depends what the situation is, but I would say as a code of ethics, as into adhering to the maintaining the public trust, I would question it.
And you don't have to guess, as Stuart mentioned about the ethics counselor. Before you leave, you can get sort of an ethics letter of whether or not what you're doing is above board.
I have a particular view on this, which goes to the question of ethics in the procurement process. And my fundamental view is that our system, while not perfect, is highly ethical. It works. There's not a better one around, right? And yet it's often criticized that politics enter into the equation, or favoritism, or whatever. How does that work within an agency or within your company?
You know, I'm sure that politics and favoritism are overtones that people perceive. But when you're actually working in this environment, it's very mindful. We're very respectful of these things when we work in industry and with government. It's a perception from the outside, but inside the rules are respected and adhered to.
Right. Well, here's one final question. I'll ask you, Dr. Nayak. Have you ever received a phone call from the president or the vice president that says, I don't care what the merits are, you're going to award that contract to contractor X?
No.
That does not happen.
I've never, and just back to this point, politics are always present, favoritism is not. So no, everyone is respectful, and there's so much around ethics on both sides, on the government contractor community and in the government. People know what those boundaries are and they respect them.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to have a very special conversation, so stay tuned. Here at Key Solutions, we've been working for more than 30 years to help government contractors win and retain contracts in excess of $130 billion. Now, we've worked with 87 out of the top 100 government contractors and hundreds of small companies as well. I'm Jim McCarthy, the owner of Key Solutions, and we want to help you win or retain your next contract. Contact us at AOC Key Solutions and click on Win.
AFCEA has been bringing government and industry together since 1946. By joining AFCEA, you'll reach the decision makers and become part of the discussion. You'll increase market visibility, gain market insight, receive discounts on AFCEA member services and events, and manage and engage corporate associates. AFCEA is the association of choice. Join today at www.afcea.org.
Kim, your takeaway, one nugget that you'd like to leave the audience would be, well, on ethics, what would it be?
Ethics and integrity above all else, and if you have a question, ask before you act.
Okay, fine. Nick?
Take your annual ethics training, and if you're a procurement official, take your annual procurement ethics training. I took my first ethics training I took through NCMA.
Through NCMA, okay. And Stuart?
Never place the public's trust at peril. When in doubt, ask your ethics counselor.
Very good. Okay. All right. Well, at this point, I have a little, say, a special conversation that we want to have. Many people know that Nick Nayak, who is the Chief Procurement Officer for DHS, has recently announced his retirement from the agency. That swept through the community, by the way. But I wanted to give you a chance of any observations that you might care to make.
Thank you, Jim. I think the word for me is grateful. I'm grateful in the little bit more than 3 years that I was at DHS that nothing happened in the country. Mission is the most important thing. The second thing is I'm so grateful to industry, all the government contractor community, as well as the 1,400 contracting professionals and the thousands of acquisition folks in DHS who do what they do on a daily basis. And then finally, I'd just like to say thank you to you and this show. You helped me drive one of my priorities at DHS as the Chief Procurement Officer, which was to improve communication with industry. So gratefulness is really how I would characterize it.
And I believe you won the Communicator of the Year award, as a matter of fact.
Fortunate enough.
Okay, well, anyone who has spent time in the government contracting arena has experienced their own obstacles and problems. It just goes with the territory. But when you're dealing with the critical nature of potential ethical issues, there is no substitute for anything less than 100% compliance, which is why today's discussion was so important and something that we simply could not have tackled without the great perspectives brought to us by our panel. So I want to thank our guests for joining us this morning. First, Dr. Nick Nayak, Chief Procurement Officer from DHS.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And also a member of the NCMA Board of Advisors.
Yes.
Appreciate that. Next, my thanks to Kim Rupert, the Senior Vice President of Contracts and Pricing for SAIC and a member of the Board of Directors of NCMA.
Yes.
Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And last but not least, we have Stuart, and Stuart Hazlett is the Director of Contracting for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. He is also a member of the NCMA Board of Advisors. So thank you very much, Stuart. I think the NCMA was well represented today. But most importantly, I want to thank you, our viewers, for once again making Government Contracting Weekly a regular part of your learning regimen. Now, on behalf of all my colleagues at Key Solutions, I'm Jim McCarthy, and I'll see you next week.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.